Hi guys, in this video I will show you how to install a hwfly clone based on the RP2040 chip. This is useful for those who want to jailbreak their Nintendo Switch to run homebrew and emulators and Linux and Android and whatever else you want to do with your jailbroken Switch. I feel like it's important to mention that this should not be used for piracy. I definitely don't condone it. I'm a game developer myself, but however, I think it's kind of cool to be able to preserve your old games even if the Nintendo store goes down and stuff like that. Remember that you should only play the games you own, and this method that I'm showing here is mostly useful for those who want to run homebrew on their Switch. Now with that being said, in this first part of the video I'm only disassembling the unit. It's kind of boring, you probably see hundreds of these online already, but here's mine, we just have to go through all of this. Here I'm just removing all of the screws from the metal shield. I like to arrange the screws on my table similarly to how I remove them. This always helps me with reassembly later. Here I am removing the Wi-Fi antennas. I am being very careful because they're super fragile and they can be easily broken. Once I remove the metal plating, I like to clean it with IPA to get a mirror finish. I think this is very important. I really hate the thermal paste stuff, but it's important to clean properly. I am now removing the heat pipe, but first I have to take a lot of time to clean all the messy paste. So once the heat pipe is removed, I clean a little bit of thermal paste under it and proceed to remove the fan. The fan is held on by 3 screws and 1 ribbon cable. It comes off very easy. At this part I move under the microscope because these connectors are so tiny and fragile that if I try to do it manually, most likely I will break them. So the microscope is really my friend here. I am always extra careful with the display connector since this is even more fragile and you can very easily break something. So once all the ribbon cables are out, I am now trying to remove the motherboard. It's held in place by 3 screws diagonally and 2 screws around the USB port. Once that, I wiggle it out, but I am being very careful because this is also a critical step. Now that the motherboard is out, I am removing the metal plating from the eMMC chip. To remove the heatsink from the system on the chip, I am using a needle. I find that this works better under a microscope. I am being extra careful here with the needle because one wrong move, one slip, and I would cut some very important traces. I am just being very patient and calm about this and taking as long as I have to and try not to slip the needle and break anything. Now that all the contacts are out from the heat shield, I am using a tweezer to carefully and gently wiggle it free. And of course, once the heatsink is off, there's even more thermal paste that you need to get rid of. Honestly, I think the most of the time is spent cleaning up thermal paste in this job. And that's why you also get to watch 25 seconds of this video, just me cleaning thermal paste. Here I am opening the mode chip. There are so many variants and names and weirdness around this, I don't know. I'm taking my time here showing you exactly which version I am using. I just noticed that one of the ribbon cables are missing, so I'm looking at the package to find it, and surely there it is. Now comes the part that in my opinion is the most brutal part of this installation. I have to use a cutter and literally cut all the metal around the eMMC chip. I am doing the same thing around the system on a chip, or the CPU, or whatever we want to call it. Here I am being super careful because it happened to me before that I broke a trace or I cut off a small piece of the CPU, which is definitely not cool for such an expensive device. Now that we properly brutalized the switch, it's time to install the dead zero line onto the eMMC chip. At this point, others like to reflow the eMMC chip. I personally don't like to do that because I think it puts everything under a lot of stress. What I like to do after installing this adapter is apply a little bit of tension and just solder it in place. In my limited experience, I find that this is more than enough, since this whole thing is only used at the boot process for a second. I think it's good enough and I never had any issues with it, but if you like to live on the edge, you should probably reflow the entire chip and make a permanent connection there. I think this is a much safer option to just rely on the tension and do it like this. I don't see any real benefit to the permanent fix, but to each their own. I think this is much safer. Here I am applying a little bit of a solder mask, not so much for adhesive reasons, because I think the solder is more than adequate. I do this so I just make sure that there are no shorts against the shielding of the eMMC chip here. Here I am cleaning up the clock line next to the CPU. This is extremely fragile. I am using a microscope and taking a lot of time and cleaning with IPA in between. I am using a needle and I am being very gentle. All I want to do is scrape off the solder mask and not hurt the trace. If the trace is damaged, your switch is gone. The kit I purchased has some convenient little ribbon cables, and I am preparing the solder points on it. These will reflow nicely onto the motherboard. Even though most of the soldering job goes smoothly for me, I do have one small part that is the bane of my existence, and this is the A point. I usually tend to burn off that tiny little resistor. If the A connection is bad, one of the main symptoms that happens is everything appears to be booting up, but as soon as you want to go into the original firmware or read the eMMC chip, you would get the purple screen of death. If you get the purple screen of death, you know that your A point needs to be soldered properly, and for me, I had to sometimes come back to this and just solder another resistor because it's so tiny and fragile that most likely I burnt it. There's nothing special here with the CPU side. I think this is one of the easiest part of the entire job. I just place this ribbon cable to the proper positioning, use my tweezers to hold it in place, use plenty of flux, and maybe not overdo it with the heat, but get a good connection. The reset point is super easy to solder to. I just use a very thin cable and route it where the audio cable goes. Before reassembling the heat shield, I like to use a little bit of Kapton tape. I don't think this is required, but better safe than sorry, right? I apply a little bit of thermal paste and prepare to install the heat shield. Once I snap the heat shield in place, I use a little bit of double-sided tape. This will be used to anchor the chip. I always like to use a microscope to attach ribbon cables because to me they're way too fragile. Before starting to reassemble, I usually measure all the contact points with a multimeter, make sure the readings are correct. You can look all this up. I did not include it in this video because it's boring. Actually, I lied. I didn't include it in this video because I forgot to record it. It's very important to measure. And now before fully assembling the unit I like to test it, and surely success! Before beginning the final reassembly I install some Kapton tape, make sure there's no shorts later on when I add the metal plating to it. And since you made it this far in this video, you will be rewarded with the final boot off sequence of the assembled Switch. Thanks for watching and have a lovely day.